We, as ancient researchers, have a problem when it comes to studying the past. We have tons of problems when it comes to studying the past. In fact, everything is literally a problem in ancient research. But one of the more crazy problems that we run into is that we find a time when everybody's ancestors, and I mean everybody's ancestors, claims that there was a time when they coexisted with a race of giants. I want to deal with this issue because this is a legitimate problem in the ancient historical research community. And it's a problem that pretty much both alternative researchers and mainstream researchers run away from this situation, or they turn a blind eye to it. That's probably a better way to put it. Because the problem, obviously, is that our ancestors are making the claim that at some point in time in the past, a race of giant humans walked the earth. Right now, so that concept in today's context, that concept in the way that we perceive things today is literally considered insane. Right? We have no frame of reference for the concept of a large giant human race. It doesn't exist. We can imagine it, but that's kind of where everything stays in the realm of, right? Giants basically only live in fairy tales in today's day and age. We read our histories and stuff, and here and there, giants pop up for some weird reason, but we immediately chalk that up to our ancestors just being dumb, just not understanding basics. Like they just weren't intelligent enough to understand that giants didn't exist, but they had no problem imagining them in their stories. They also put them in their histories as well, but it's all fake. All of this stuff is fake, even though all of our ancient ancestors talk about a time when they were interacting with giants, when they were dealing with giants both in a good way and a bad way. All of this is just fake. Everybody's ancestors was just high on drugs. Everybody just crazy back in the day. Just nobody cared. Everyone just smoking crack, losing their mind, talking about giants, putting it into their history because why not? Why not, right? Let's just put giants into our history and we'll troll the people in the future. Now, if they did that, I would appreciate that because that's a good troll. But that is not what it seems like they were doing. The reality is this. Our ancient ancestors decided to transmit certain pieces of information to the best of their ability through time so that we could now hear it. Right? These people did not go out of their way to just transmit garbage. Our ancestors took the time to ensure that various bits of information would carry on through the generations, and they would not have wasted their time on something if it probably wasn't real, or at the very least, it did not hold some sort of special meaning or special context that was important for the future generations. So we find ourselves in a real situation that we cannot ignore. If we are going to take our ancient history seriously, we have to take seriously the aspects of that history that maybe seem a little crazy or schizo or just absolutely out of your mind. And the reality is, the concept of giants is absolutely one of these issues. And because it seems schizo, crazy, etc., it is more often than not relegated into the realm of fiction. Now, this is one hell of an error. Why is this a problem? Because here's the deal. In ancient history, if our ancestors are trying to tell us something, we need to pay attention to whatever it is they are talking about. Remember, if we are going to approach ancient history with a scientific mindset and a mindset geared in critical thinking and just using common sense, we do not get to pick and choose what evidence we like and what evidence we don't like while we try to paint the picture of what happened in the past. That is not how science works, but that is exactly how mainstream academia works. Now, is that how things are supposed to go? Is that what we should find acceptable to us in our research? I mean, should we really allow anybody on either side of the historical research spectrum, should we ever allow people to just pick and choose evidence that they like and that they don't like to build up a case for whatever pet theory they have going on? And of course the answer is no. If you said the answer was yes, you are not operating in science. We are going to always use the scientific method, and we are always going to use critical thinking methodology. And all of those, all of those tools that we have, they all demand that we face all of the evidence with an open mind, and we look into all of it and take it all seriously. We cannot possibly ever hope to understand any of our ancient past if we are discarding the things that our ancestors are talking about. You just can't do that. You cannot just get rid of stuff you don't like. All right, that's enough complaining. So here is the deal. Or the premise, I should say. And our premise is this, or this is the statement that we are going to make, and we are going to explore scientifically using critical thinking capabilities. Here it is. Could giants have possibly existed simultaneously with our ancient ancestors in the past? Is it possible that all of these supposed fairy tales are not fairy tales at all, or all of these instances where we find interactions with a giant race, are these works of fiction, or are these the missing pieces in human history that have the chance to explain so much of the stuff that we are missing right now, especially in the mainstream? So let's start at the beginning, and when we get to the end, we shall stop. All right, so here's the problem. Why is the concept of giants not taken seriously? Let's start with a very basic question. Remember, we just want to ask basic questions whenever we approach a possible problem in anything really, but ancient history right now is what we're talking about. So let's ask that question. Why is it so unbelievable that giants could have existed simultaneously with humans in a relatively recent past? Why do we have this problem? Why do we have this phobia? All right, now the first thing that we are going to find when we start digging into this question is that this phobia that we now have nowadays, in today's day and age, is a relatively new phenomenon. You do not have to go back very far to find that people had no problem with giants existing. I mean, literally, 80, 90 years even, people were not really, it wasn't a big deal. Like, the concept of giants existing was like, yeah, they existed. We don't have a problem with that. Especially if you go even back that far, because in America, at this time, other areas as well, but America's really a hotbed for giant discoveries, as in the 1800s, as all of the people are starting to spread out over the land. They're making all of these amazing archaeological finds, and they were publishing them, and we'll go over all of this stuff in a different episode, but the reality is there's literally hundreds of articles, if not thousands actually, of articles of people finding giants. I mean, it's all over the place. And nobody was batting an eye. People were not freaking out. People were not like, oh my god, a giant? What, really? How the hell are they giant? People were not losing their minds. The reason why they were not losing their minds is because they didn't care about it. It was already basically accepted. Now, the pushback you can immediately give me is you can say, well, I mean, they were, Christians or Catholic, Abrahamic religions, and of course, those crazy nut jobs believed in giants. So, I mean, why? That's what we would expect from crazy nut jobs. All right, but then we can push back again, and we can say, hey, you know what? The Native Americans that they were pushing, that existed in this time period as well, also had stories of giants, and they had no problem believing in giants either. Not only did the American Indians not have a problem believing in giants, but giants were one of the pillars of their mythologies, or their histories is what I should say. Even more interesting is that those mythologies, quote unquote, they took place here in America, and they talk about dealing with giants in America. So given that the American Indians are already well acquainted with the concept, and giants are very much a part of their history, it would only make sense that the American settlers, the new people that had showed up, would also be running into those histories and those discoveries. And that is exactly what happens. Now, the reason why nobody bats an eye, like I said, is because both sides, everybody back then, nobody really questioned it because they already assumed that that was the case. And it's not because both the American Indians and the Catholics or Christians or whoever was coming into America were just dumb religious people. No, it was because these people were paying attention to what their ancestors had been transmitting throughout the centuries, and if this was the norm, like this is what was accepted, because why would they be lied to? I think one of the concepts that we have lost, or I guess you could say we are losing, though I guess you could probably say we've lost, is the reliance on our ancestors' stories to try to uncover history, to try to remember your roots. Now, I'm not talking for the whole world, obviously. I know there are still people that hold on to those, and that's good. But in the Western world, it is very much frowned upon, right? For you to look back and take your ancestors seriously. You're not allowed to take pride in anything your ancestors have done nowadays. You know, that's kind of the reality we live in now. There is, like it or not, there is a push to erase many aspects of reality. Now that's other talks as well, but anyway, but this is a newer phenomena, right? Sort of a newer phenomena. This is a newer phenomena on a global scale, I should say. The reality is, the further back you go in history, the more that people take what their ancestors had to say seriously. Right? People had a better connection, you know, relatively speaking. I know I've said that like twice. They had a, relatively speaking, better connection to their ancestors because that was the culture. And that was the general culture for everybody. Because why wouldn't you pay attention to your ancestors? Right? These are the people that came before you. You would think that you would want to learn where you came from, or at the very least learn what they had learned to make sense out of where your culture and your civilization is going. Right? You know, if you can control that, then you can control the population. And that's also a different show. Anyway, so this phenomena of looking at a concept like giants in ancient history is very much brand new. Right? This is a new psychological situation. And that's exactly what it is. So what we find ourselves in today's day and age is that we find ourselves in a position in the Western world. It's very important for me to say that, but globally it's probably more true than it ever has been. But the reality is that nowadays there are quite a few psychological conditioning tactics being used right now to implant all kinds of doubts, misinformation, etc. into the general population. Right? And so one of the things that has happened over the decades or centuries now, I guess you could say, is that we have a group of people who are centralized in the world of academia, right? This is supposed to be a respected academic center of knowledge, trust the science. If these people say something isn't real, then it's not real. Then that's it. You're not allowed to go against them. Now, if we travel back just a few hundred years ago, it was, obviously information dissemination was not at the scale that it is now. So it wasn't impacting everybody. That's why I say it's a newer phenomena. These psychological conditioning programs to where they pushed aside your common sense and your critical thinking skills when it comes to the concept of giants on this scale are brand new. So now we find ourselves with a general population that has an immediate aversion to the concepts of giants for no other reason than they were told to not believe in them. So that is not how science works. That is not a scientific approach to history, which means that we can discard that approach. There is no reason to hold the position that giants are fiction as a default. You can stay skeptical of it, as you should. That's no problem. Stay in the middle. But when you automatically assume that the concept of giants are a fiction, and you came to that position solely because you were told that's the case, then you are not engaging in science, or people like that are not engaging in real science. Now, should we be basing our own conclusions on history in this context on people who are objectively not engaging in science? And of course the answer is no. So as historians, if we find ourselves talking to somebody who is discarding possibilities in an unscientific manner, right, we can move on. We don't have to pay attention to them anymore. And that's actually one of the main things I want people to understand, is that you do not have to get the approval of the mainstream, or you do not have to get the approval of somebody who is popular. You can just slap that person and move on. There's no reason to continue to listen to somebody who has come to a decision unscientifically about a scientific situation. All right, but now you're like, all right, fine, that's right. But, I mean, you're talking about giants, dude. What do you mean? Well, you're talking about these guys who are like 8, 9, 10, 12, 20 feet, stomping around, slapping people? I mean, what? That's crazy. I mean, that's not possible. There's no, that's not happening. And those people are absolutely correct. The concept of giants, given what we know today, seems insane. Right? I do not fault anyone at all for doubting the concept of giants, not just because some academics told you it was wrong, but because your own experiences, your own eyes, tell you that there's no giants. Observational data is a huge cornerstone of the scientific method, and right now, observational data says, I don't know, bro, I don't think that giants ever existed. So that is a logical position to take, and I was right there. I was right there 5, 6, 7 years ago. I was in that crowd too. If you mentioned giants to me, I wouldn't immediately discard you because I always try to keep an open mind. But the reality is I had no real evidence. There was nothing at that point in time for me to be like, yeah, the possibility is there and I should take it seriously. Because I had been affected by the exact same psychological conditioning programs that everybody else has been. The problem is, even if you are open-minded to a concept, the way that we are molded psychologically now today is that it can still divert you away from areas that you otherwise would have been open to. So even though you might think you're an open person, hey, I'm open to concepts, blah, 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 the reality is these conditioning programs that are done to us, they really eat at people and they can create false positives. You are probably not as open to ideas as you believe you are. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this show, because giants is very much, it's like a simple concept, but it's also a concept that people find offensive. And I don't think a lot of people really understand why they even find it offensive or why they even find it ridiculous, because most people don't think about it. And the reason most people don't deeply think about it, I suppose I should say, is because they've been trained not to. You've already been given the answer. The Smithsonian says that they are not real. So somebody would have called out the Smithsonian, and they're scientists, so they would have changed their mind if giants weren't real. But they say it, so, they're not real, right? Appeals to authority. And that's basically what all that conditioning leads to. Okay, anyway, enough about that schizo stuff. It's not schizo, it's real. But anyway, all right, so I completely understand that position, and I was right there. But here's the deal. One of the things that I never thought about, and what I also see most people make the mistake of when it comes to understanding or even beginning to look at the giant situation in ancient history, is this. The reality is the concept of giants is a scientific possibility. Right, that's the first thing, and we don't even need history. We really don't need any of that. We can scientifically say that the concept of giants is a reality. There is nothing unscientific about a giant human. Literally nothing. Right? There is not a single shred of evidence that would ever say, no, giants couldn't have existed back in the day. Nothing, literally nothing. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Everything we know biologically would absolutely allow for a race of giants. And that's the case. That's the reality. That's the truth. And a lot of people don't want to hear that because that's tough. Because a lot of people nowadays think they're scientific, but they're not. They don't look at the realities of what all the amazing things that we have found out and all the stuff that we have discovered. They don't want to put that into a context of something that they have already been told is fictional. But giants are a scientific possibility. So if we have a real scientific possibility of something existing, and then we have eyewitness testimony all across the planet from all of our ancestors talking about giants, I mean, what does that say? Where does the evidence lead us? Right? And this is how I got mixed up in this. I was just doing my research, doing my studies, going out there and doing that crap, and giants. And if you're objective, I mean, I was doing objective research. I'm doing my best. I'm not perfect. But if I stay objective, if I was staying objective, and if you stay objective, you have no choice. People, all of us, we have no choice but to deal with giants in history because all of the evidence points to the concept of giants being a real possibility. And not just a possibility, but a reality. Because like I said, our ancestors never talked about these things. I mean, sometimes sometimes there's a fairy tale or whatever, but those fairy tales always came out of or were inspired by an earlier tale, which was generally a historical recounting. All right, don't forget, fairy tales are also a relatively newer phenomena, at least the ones that we are all used to nowadays, in the Western world, that is. But those fairy tales, where we often find giants, they were inspired by actual stories from back in the day. That's how things go, and that's not argued. That's how these things come about. So if we find ourselves with a scientific possibility, if we find ourselves with our ancestors telling us that they existed, the next question we have to ask is, why are we ignoring this? Why are these data points, these data sets, being ignored? And they're being ignored by the historical community, and they're being ignored by the scientific community. Not only are they just being ignored, though, they are being attacked. Now, if there's one thing that I have learned, is that when we find institutions going out of their way to not only just dismiss a concept, but to actively attack it, and I mean actively just go after it, like teeth bared and everything, just try to kill it, shoot it down, try to make it to where if anybody believes this certain subject that you are a horrible person or that you're stupid or whatever they go for. Whenever you see an institution do something like this, there's probably a reason for it. And that reason is probably not something like, oh, it just didn't happen, it's a fairy tale, and we can move on. Because a mature adult, would just dismiss it and they would move on. They would not go out of their way to create entire organizations designed to attack a specific idea. And the only reason you go out of your way to attack something is if you feel threatened. So what do we have here then? That means that we can look at the mainstream's unbelievable closed-mindedness to a scientific possibility, and we can ask ourselves the legitimate question, what are these people afraid of? What is going on? Who cares if giants were real in our past? If that is what is in our past, then so be it. It doesn't matter. Who cares? There's no reason to freak out about it. But for some weird reason, we have a huge chunk of the mainstream academic population absolutely conditioned to immediately hate on the concept of giants. So now we find ourselves with two problems while we were just looking at one. And both of these problems are fairly indicative of what's going on in civilization today. So obviously our first problem is that we have supposed science-based academics, who are supposed to use and trust the science and base all of their decisions on that, completely ignoring a scientific concept and ignoring scientific evidence of the possibility of giants in our past. Now that's bad enough. All right, it's bad enough that we have academicians completely disregarding real scientific evidence that may support the possibility that giants existed. But then, once we look at how the establishment attacks the premise, something's not right. Something is going on. There's no reason to attack people that are following the evidence, right? That's not how science works. You follow the science, you follow the evidence, and then you take it wherever it leads you. And what's very interesting is that all of the evidence that we start to look at when we think about giants, and when we start to look at all the ancient histories of our ancestors, what we start to find is that the evidence for giants existing, it's there. Like, it's incontrovertibly there. It's ridiculously there. Like, to the point to where if you're ignoring it, you have to admit that you are no longer interested in trying to uncover the real history of whatever the hell happened back in the day. Right? Now, so this is poison. It's pure poison. Right? That's not how things work. But why does it work like that? I mean, this is a serious problem. Why do we have a system that, says that it loves science and says that, oh yeah, we only trust the science and we follow the science. But then when you show them other science, oh, no, not that science. No. I was told by some other dude I'm not allowed to believe in that. That's not how it works. Okay? But what's interesting about the giant situation and the fact that it is attacked is when you start to look at how giants are portrayed throughout history, it's possible, or you can definitely come to the conclusion that it's possible that there are people on this planet right now who are well aware of the situation regarding giants in history, and they may have a vested interest in suppressing that information. Now, that might sound crazy at first, but bear with me. Let's cover some of this. All right, we're going schizo. Let's focus up. All right, so we're going to come back to the basics of giants, and then we'll see where this leads us. So we've asked the basic question, is it possible that giants could have existed in our past? And the answer is scientifically yes. All right, so we've got that. Let's move on. All right, so if we can think that it's possible, all right, fine, you'll give me that. Okay, great, fine, whatever, giant humans could have existed. That's technically correct, the best kind of correct. All right, but okay, prove it though. Like, what are you talking about? Just because our ancestors who didn't understand, very basic stuff, they were making up things, that does not mean that giants existed. All right, so let's move on to the actual physical evidence. If the premise is true, giants once a race of giants, a separate race of giants existed. Let's cover that really quick. It's really important to understand that the giants we are talking about, these are not larger versions of us today. This is not the people that we're talking about. We are talking about a completely different, species, race, whatever. I don't know what it's called. It's a completely different thing. It's not a human in the sense that we think of and experience humans today, right? It's a different thing. And once again, that is entirely scientifically possible. There's no reason to believe that you could not have a different kind of human. We know for a fact that the possibility of different hominids exists, right? I mean, you just go look at anthropologists. That entire area of science is literally dedicated to finding and discovering new kinds of hominids. That's all it does, right? That's literally the entire science. So, it's not weird to think that there could have been another human-like creature thing back in the day. And it's certainly not unbelievable to believe that a giant race could have coexisted with our ancestors. The science of anthropology, as flawed as it currently is supports that. It's ironic, actually, that mainstream people will have no problem listening to the garbage that flows out of anthropologists' mouth. By the way, remember, I'm not religious. I don't believe in God. I'm not saying any of that stuff. I'm just saying that anthropology in its current form is trash, right? It's an absolutely corrupted science. Anyways, mainstream people have no problem listening to anthropologists say, oh yeah, we found this monkey dude over here, we found its knuckle bone, and now we think the entire population lived right here, right? That's how anthropologists work. Anyway, so, but everybody nods and is like, yeah, okay, yeah, smart guy, blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, well, giants could have existed, and then it's like, no, it's not possible. We could not possibly have had a different, larger race of human. Oh, but we can have those weird-looking monkey humans, but we can't have a larger version of us, right? That's not, it's like, shut up, okay? Come on. Of course it's possible. It's ridiculous. This is the kind of stuff that is absolutely unbelievably irritating when it comes to reading mainstream crap, because they're always so hypocritical. All right. Okay, all right, back to giants. All right, so we can scientifically establish that the possibility of a larger giant type race could have indeed coexisted with our ancestors. And I think I've said that like 12,000 times. Let's move on. All right, so we need evidence though, right? Let's move on to the next problem. If we're going to make that claim, what the hell is the evidence? Why would we make that claim? Where is this coming from? Right? So, obviously we're starting with our ancient historical texts and oratory histories. We've got those. And we have those all over the world that, from everybody. It's really important to remember that everybody has this history. Right? Everybody says that giants existed and our ancestors had to deal with them. All right, so fine, we've established that. Great, whatever. Okay, but where is the evidence? All right, so the evidence is everywhere. It's hilarious that the evidence is found all over the world. The problem is what we were just talking about a little bit earlier. We have the scientific evidence that shows, hey, look, it's really good evidence that shows you that an ancient race of giants may have existed on this planet. Here's all these artifacts, bones, DNA, etc. But because the mainstream has been trained or has been training people to always immediately discard whatever they find or whatever evidence is brought up to support the claim of giants, no evidence is ever good enough. Now, that's not science. When we have evidence of a premise, we have to follow that evidence. So the giants are everywhere, but let me have fun. Let's focus on North America, because this is a really good one, because in my opinion, North American ancient history is not that well known, and it's not really that well studied. And there's various reasons for that, but I think it's interesting that fact alone exists. The fact that everybody seems to like to focus on, like, the European, African area, Asia as well. But North America, and to a lesser degree South America, always comes in at like a very distant, it's just kind of hand-waved. Why is that? Well, because North America especially, but to a degree I would say South America as well, these two continents very much have an aura of being fresh, of being undiscovered territory, being new. And there's various reasons for that, right? So European descent, that kind of history, that is new to the Europeans, right? So they come over, we come over, whatever. People come over, they see it, it's new. That gets baked into the country that would eventually become, and it's all new. So it's told from a perspective that it is legitimately new. But what nobody does tell you when you're getting your indoctrination doses from whatever you were learning when you were growing up, nobody stops and tells you, oh, hey, by the way, the American Indians that are here, that the mainstream consistently says are native, they themselves, in their own histories, in their own mythologies, make the very, 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 very specific claim that they are new as well. That they migrated to these areas just like the Europeans did. They just got here a little earlier. What's even more interesting when you start to study American Indian mythology, which nobody ever does because nobody wants to hear about, a crow flying around and stuff like that. And everybody just hand waves that stuff, right? Same reason everybody hand waves religions. They just think it's crazy talk. But when you actually read American Indian histories and you look at what they're saying, I mean, it's amazing. The story, and it's right there. The catastrophism is there. The history is there. But anyway, so American Indians show up over here and they very specifically state that they were not the original people here. And when they came over here, there were already people settled over here. And these people that were settled over here, ironically enough, right, had white skin. And I'm not going to go any further with that, but one of the other things that the American Indians talk about when they come over here is they also talk about the fact that giants are absolutely roaming the area, right? There's no giants are here. Like when they show up in the North American area, this is after a cataclysm, by the way. When they show up, giants are already here. They've already been established. And the giants, by the way, they would in theory also be recovering from the catastrophe that just happened. But this is why America is kind of looked at as a newer or fresher country, or I should say the North American continent, and to a lesser degree South America. The reason why is because it quite literally is a newer, fresher piece of land to everybody. It doesn't even matter your tradition, whether you're European, American Indian, whatever you are, it doesn't matter. Your stuff is all relatively new because your ancestors, they fled from the original catastrophe and they ended up over here, right? And when they end up over here, they have a problem. They have a problem that is called giants, right? So is this evidence? No, right? So I'm just giving like a layout so you guys see what's kind of going on here. Like I said, we'll focus on North America here to kind of build a little bit of a case as to why we need to take it seriously. And one of the reasons why I want to use North America is because people just disregard all of North American ancient history as if it doesn't exist, or like I said, if it's based on India, any of the American Indian mythologies, that stuff is immediately pushed away by mainstream, right? Nobody is giving American Indians credit for anything. Those people back in the day, they went through hell. Everybody did, technically. But nobody pays attention to this. Everybody just hand waves it because of the very particular way the stories are told, right? They're told very illustrative, very euphemism-y, I guess you could say. Anyway. So, America had a giant problem. Okay, fine, you're going to make that premise. Okay, well, prove it. As I've already kind of mentioned in this show, to prove it, one of the things that we would expect to find are artifacts, domiciles, buildings, ruins, etc., bodies, bones, leftovers. And when we go and we start to look for these things, sure enough, we find them. We find everything I just said. We literally check the boxes of every piece of evidence that I just listed off. All right, so let's go back to the European perspective. When they come over, as the settlers start to spread out, what they start to run into are some very interesting problems. One of the interesting situations that they run into is they are finding mounds all over the eastern side of the United States. Right? There's these just gigantic mounds of dirt. Right? And I know a lot of people, they hear, oh, a mound of dirt. I could do that in like 2 seconds. It's a mound of dirt, whatever. No, when you have mounds of dirt that are 100 yards high, right? And they span a quarter of a mile, and there's various sizes, but this is an architectural event. You don't just pile up dirt like that for fun. That is a logistical problem you need to overcome if you are going to do something like that. Right? Now, for a human, that'd be a pain in the butt, especially back in the day, because back in the day you would have only had maybe shovels and pickaxes, right? That would have sucked. Like, that job would have been legitimately bad. But what the American Indians tell the settlers is they tell them straight up, we did not build these mounds. These mounds are given credit to all these various tribes, and these various tribes, when you go back further in their history, the original tribes people, they have no problem admitting and saying, hey, look, we didn't build any of these. We didn't build any of these. It was the giants that built these things. Now that's interesting. Okay. So if I'm going to take American Indians at face value. Why not? Right? We shouldn't we? I mean, we shouldn't ignore them, in my opinion. So I'm not going to ignore them. So if we go off of just what they said there, and we have physical evidence, that's a great start. Okay, fine. Giants were here, and they built great mounds of dirt. Wow, man, that's really proof. That's just really impressive. All right, fine. Whatever, fair enough. It is impressive, by the way. Those mounds are impressive. But it gets infinitely more crazy. Because what happened when the settlers started to expand, they started clearing the land, right? They started having to tear down these mounds of dirt. That were a lot of, it's funny, a lot of the mounds of dirt that they started to tear into, they did not realize were even giant mounds during that period of time. They were, overgrown and stuff like that. And there are literally hundreds of thousands of these mounds. They're everywhere. Anyway, so as the settlers start to tear into these mounds, as they start to clear land, well, what do they find? I mean, if giants are real, they should find something, right? And yes, that is exactly what happens. We find ourselves in the 16, 17, and 1800s flooded, just flooded with stories of artifacts, of encounters, etc., with either giant remains or giant artifacts. Right? And this is common. It's hilarious when you go back and you start to read like real history, when you read the real reality of what all of these people were dealing with as they were going across America. It's right there. It's not hidden. There's nothing that's like it's blocking any of this except for the current mainstream. When you go back and you look at the raw history, the evidence for giants is hilarious. I mean, it's inexcusably ignored. It's just absolutely insane. So let's take a step back really fast. If we use our critical thinking skills and we employ the scientific method and we look at our premise, okay, fine, our premise is giants exist, then we should find evidence. Well, what did I just cover? Right? We find exactly what we would expect to find if that premise is true. Now, for those of you who are like, yeah, okay, fine, that there is a lot of that stuff out there, but it's still not proof. Well, what do you want from me, man? The only reason why people don't take it as proof, in the mainstream anyway, is because they have been psychologically conditioned to immediately discard the information. We've covered this, but this is a reality. Right? And all of us are plagued by this, by the way. There's not a single one of us, if we're in the Western world, that is immune from this kind of propaganda, all right? If you exist in the Western world, you've been infected. It's just a reality. We all have depending on where you are in your studies nowadays and how much you have worked to overcome this, if you are somebody who has tried, everybody, we have natural psychological barriers that will immediately trigger when you even hear the concept of giants. Think about that. When you shut this off and you unsubscribe from the channel and you dislike this garbage, just think about that. Think about, it's not just giants, but think about the concept of giants and really ask yourself, how do you feel, or how did you feel when you would initially hear about the concept? Were you open and welcoming to it, or were you immediately hostile to it? Immediately. Right? And if you were immediately hostile to it in one degree or another, then ask yourself why. And I guarantee you are not going to answer, well, I did a lot of scientific research and testing and study, and I came to this conclusion on my own. Because that's not what happened, is it? No, you immediately hated on the idea because we've been programmed to hate on the idea. I'm right there with you, by the way. It's still there to one degree or another. Getting rid of these psychological triggers is a pain in the ass. But it's something that we have to acknowledge and deal with. And we'll keep doing that here forever. Anyway, so I just want to point that out, because if you have had an aversion to the concept of giants, literally ask yourself why, and do a sincere deep dive into yourself. Like, really have a good one-on-one with yourself and see if you can't problem solve why you had that particular reaction whenever you heard the term giant, or whenever anybody said, oh yes, giants existed, and you immediately thought they were a conspiracy theorist or something like that, right? The term conspiracy theorist, why does that pop up in your mind? It's because it's been psychologically implanted in there, blah blah. Okay, anyway, that's a completely different story. All right, so let's go back to this. Okay, so we can establish that if giants did exist, there should be a ton of evidence for it. It should be in our histories, it should be in our artifacts, I mean, and we should see the remnants of it, and sure enough, we do. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. If you're still operating on the mainstream timeline of everything taking, hundreds of thousands, millions, or billions of years to happen, giants become a weird subject. In fact, pretty much everything kind of becomes a weird subject because you have to somehow fit all of this stuff into this huge, ridiculous span of time that we have no evidence for ever of happening, right? Right now, the evidence that we have for giants is fading, and it's fading across the planet, and it's fading quickly. Like I said, there are parties out there right now who are actively going out to destroy this stuff, and we have so many stories all throughout the past few hundred years of organizations just literally going out of their way to destroy the evidence, that it's something we should pay attention to regardless. I mean, that's a real problem, and because it's everywhere. It's not like we find this like one or two little instances of the destruction of archaeological evidence. We find the destruction of archaeological evidence all over the place, especially when it comes to whenever something can be linked to giants. Right? Now, that's not how archaeology is done. That's not how science is done. So that should be a huge red flag to every single person on the planet who thinks that truth matters. Right? But if you don't think giants are real, then that means they aren't true, which means you don't care if the artifacts are destroyed. Right? So we've got that going on. We have malicious organizations out there right now grabbing that evidence, destroying it, taking it. God knows what else they're doing with it. Okay, so here's the other part we have to deal with. We have to deal with the second law of thermodynamics. All right, what do I mean? Right now, one of our problems that everybody knows in ancient history is that, everything is decaying, everything is degrading. Even if something is just a few thousand years old, I mean, look at it. It's decayed significantly. It doesn't take long for stuff to be chewed away, either on purpose or just naturally. Things start to decay, things go away. The evidence for giants, that's exactly what's happening to the evidence for giants. That is exactly what's going on. All right, now the next problem, actually, when we come to the evidence of giants being destroyed, we also run into something very interesting, and that is whenever a giant's body was ever found in the mounds, for example. Let's use all the mounds in America. It was very common, by the way, for these people to find 8 to 10 foot giants' bodies buried in these mounds. All right, and you can go read countless stories, and I'm going to keep schizoing out on this subject anyway, so I will bring some of those to you guys and talk about it, and we'll go over it. But they're all over the place. You don't even, you don't have to take my word for it. There's books written on this stuff that is literally just full of nothing else but articles written from throughout history. It's amazing. Anyway, so the evidence is there, and the reports are there. And not only, so they find the giants between 8, 9, 10, 12 feet tall. 8-ish to 9-ish feet seems to be the average. That's an important thing to remember, but that's for a different show. Anyway, anything above 7 feet is pretty dang tall, and if you are consistently finding, human bodies that are 8, 9, 10, 12 feet tall, this is something else, all right? Now, what happens when these people are finding these giants? What's going on? They find these bodies and they're blown away, right? The size is the obvious first point that they notice. These guys are giants. It's like, wow, holy crap, here are the people from, the Bible, for example, that we've been reading about our entire life, and here they are. Wow, it's really cool. Other perspectives would have been like, well, yeah, the American Indians told us that these guys made these mounds and buried their people here. I mean, yeah, we should expect to find that, and sure enough, you do. All right, but it gets even weirder, right? So the next thing they find that's very common is they find that there, for whatever reason, a lot of these skeletons have double rows of teeth. Now, this is an important point to remember as we go on through other shows about this, because it's not just in America that people recount finding rows of double teeth in these skulls, right? These double rows of teeth, for example, are found all over the planet. Right? And there's no reason for a lot of the areas of the planet that find these things, they're not communicating with each other when these finds are made. Right? That doesn't happen. People are finding these things and reporting them, and they're talking about the exact same thing because they physically found them. That means they're real. That means they were there. Nobody's making this stuff up. And anyway, I don't want to go too much into the double teeth thing, right? But the point is that these people are finding exactly what they expected to find if the story of giants are true. Now, here's the problem with the evidence, though. So when they open these mounds, what happens is that the bones exposed to oxygen after being down there for hundreds or, maybe 1,000-ish years or so. The dates, I don't really have a good date for you. I can't tell you that. But they would have been down there probably for centuries. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe not even centuries. Who knows? Maybe it wasn't that long. That's possible as well. Anyways, the point is that once these giant bones are exposed to the open air, they start to disintegrate, and they disintegrate quick. And this is another key feature, an unfortunate feature, of what people find when they discover a giant body. It's very common that when anybody finds giant bones, they're all amazed by it and everything, and they're like, holy crap, we found them. And then if they touch them, a lot of the time they immediately disintegrate right then and there. If the bones hold together long enough, they'll last for a little bit, but still, at the end of the day, they all seem to disintegrate. Now, for anybody who's skeptical, this is a problem, and I get it. So you're basically, what I'm saying is that, oh, that's nice. So you had the evidence, but it just magically disintegrates. All right, yeah, and that's a point against it, and I'm not going to lie. Good news is that we do have pictures of the giant bodies out there here and there, and of course those pictures are immediately derided by the mainstream and have been called fakes. There's no proof at all that they're fakes. They just are fakes by extension of being associated with a giant, with giants like that. Then they're immediately fake. You can't possibly take them for real. You can never look at it, and from a scientific perspective, it has to be fake. That is how that stuff is taken, all right? So we do have physical evidence that are out there. We have pictures that are out there. But these bones, they do apparently disintegrate. Now, that's a problem. That's a serious problem. But it might be an insight into our chronology that we wouldn't have had otherwise if they didn't disintegrate. That's a different show as well, or a different part of a different show. Anyway, but this is what we can get out of the disintegration. If the bones are disintegrating upon being exposed to open modern day air, basically modern day atmosphere, what we might be able to conclude, or at least suggest, is that when these giants were alive back in the day, their earth, their atmosphere was intrinsically different. Right? That's point one. And of course, we know scientifically that things were indeed different. But if we find that the Earth was indeed, the atmosphere of Earth is obviously changed, and we know this is not debated. The only debates are really when and how it kind of changes. Anyways, but we know it changes. If giants existed during a time where the atmosphere was different, that's one way we could probably date them with any luck. Right? So that's one interesting point. The other point biologically is this. If these giants are indeed a separate race, and that's what our premise is. These are a completely different kind of humanoid. They're their own thing. They may look like humans generally, but there's something else. There's something else is going on with them. Right? Their bones may also be genetically structured different than ours are now, which means that if those bones sit somewhere for long enough, they may deteriorate faster given certain conditions purely because of the genetic structure or their biological makeup. That means that they would be different than humans, and that's exactly what we would expect. Now, I know there are instances, of course, of human bones disintegrating and all of that stuff. It's just something to point out and something to think about, because that would show that, yeah, they are biologically different and they do indeed decay differently, right? So you start to see this evidence. All right, I got to wrap this up, right? That's too much crazy talk right now. All right, so the concept of giants, it's worth taking seriously. And we've gone on here for 12,000 hours or whatever we're doing, but there's so much evidence and so much potential for the concept that you can't just ignore it. So if you've been on the fence about giants, I was right there with you. Please don't forget that. And I'm still skeptical about stuff, by the way. But what I cannot do anymore is I cannot deny the scientific fact that giants may have actually existed. And like it or not, we do have the evidence to support that existence. Now, given that we do have scientific evidence, and given that we do have essentially eyewitness testimony from our ancestors and their stories, the conclusion we have to come to is that at the very least, the concept is something that cannot be pushed aside. All right, that's enough schizo for now. But hopefully what I've done is using very basic critical thinking skills and pointing out the scientific evidence and the scientific possibility. And this is only a very surface level look, right? I mean, we're not going into anything crazy yet. I just wanted to show that taking the concept seriously, A, is not going to hurt you. You can do that. It's not going to kill you. You can actually look at something that you've usually been trained to hate on, and instead of hating on it, you can go try and look at it from a real critical thinking perspective. And B, the potential for what the possibility of giants brings to both history and science could actually fill in a lot of gaps that a lot of us struggle with right now. Like I said, I did not come to looking into giants because I had a pet theory or because I thought, oh yeah, I'm a schizo and I think giants are there with no reasoning. I was forced to start looking into the concept of giants because all of the research took me there. I had no choice. And I think probably a lot of you here and there, even if you've been dodging it, you know, the deeper you get into a lot of this historical stuff, you find giants playing one hell of a pivotal role in ancient history. You can't ignore it, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you can't. It's not scientifically honest, and it's not intellectually honest. So that means if we are going to be true to the scientific method, to common sense, and to critical thinking, we have no choice. We have got to look into this subject and take it seriously.